Recording in progress. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you, Dr. Dee-Dee.
Hi.
For taking on this project.
This was Gadi's idea, this topic. I wasn't really on board. And then once we started talking about it and reading about it, it really started to disturb me. So Gadi suggested that we talk about artificial intelligence. How does that, could doctors be replaced?
I could use it.
Exactly.
To replace.
You might not need your full brain anymore if you can just use AI.
I don't have my full.
Well, it turns out that when I was investigating this in January of this year, ChatGPT, which is a database, right now there's like these databases, they're called open access artificial intelligence. And you can put in any question. You can say, write a Devar Torah on Bereshis in the language of Gadi Levi, using Rashi on the first pasuk, and it'll actually spit it out for you.
Wow.
Did you try it?
Yeah, we did. We did it. We did
And what
it.
happened?
It was great. It
It was Gadi?
Yeah. Well, we asked it to write a Dvar Torah, I think, by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs.
Yeah, that's a great exercise.
Yeah. So
AI, so ChatGPT asked its machine to take the medical boards, the medical licensing exam, and it passed.
whoa.
It didn't pass with 100%. It passed with 60%, like 50 to 60%. So it did average, but it passed. And they say that the more it learns, the better it'll get, right? But the problem is it still isn't capable of like making endearing comments. Like I read a few articles about it, like they would say a pun or say something funny. It can't do that yet, you know, but
Google can.
Dare I say, I sent my mother a birthday gift. I bought a card. I was in the post office. Like, I need to write something.
yeah.
And like, I was in the line and I'm just like, my brain was just not able to do anything. And I went to GPT. I was like, write a short birthday note to my mother.
Oh my gosh.
And you sent it.
I should read to you my mother's comments to me. She's like, the gift was not important. The card meant so much.
No way.
No,
You need to come clean on that one.
We got a little blackmail thing going.
Rabbi Gadi.
Yeah. Sorry, I just needed to put it on. Okay. Yeah. To Razel.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. So tonight's class is dedicated towards, in memory of Razel Bas Reuven, Laura Khan's mom, who passed away this afternoon. Yeah, that's a phenomenal participant. Great energy. Her face was on the front of our fundraiser last year.
Oh,
You want to be seen?
right now.
Okay.
Just close the door, please. Okay. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see
Nice
you.
to be seen.
The way that we should approach this is to think of it as, let's take ethics and let's see if artificial intelligence can meet those ethical standards that we live by when we doctor. That's how I thought about this problem. This problem that we're talking about, that's how I thought about how to attack it. Can it really do the same things? What are some of the issues that might come about, right? So I'm a surgeon. I had a robot that assisted me It was called a robotic, the Da Vinci robot, right? So that assisted me. I was still in charge, right? But as a human, I make mistakes. As a human, I have fatigue, right? As a human, there is error, but then again, does a robot have error? How much error? Are we reducing error by using a robot? Would you, anybody in this room, would you prefer a surgeon who is a robot or a person? So all of you think people.
Depends on how
I had surgery with the Da Vinci.
Yeah.
I'm very happy.
It depends on the surgery.
It depends on how complicated it is and what the main metric is. If it's precision and an obvious process that doesn't map out new territory, then it'd be a hard decision. I'd be inclined to say, like they do with corneas.
Yeah. They
A robot
put in,
can be much more precise than a human.
so I think I'm on the same page as you, actually.
The robot can be more precise.
I believe, so I just read an article about how this group of physicians was, attempting to do, let's say, 15 Brazilian butt lifts in a day. And because of that, they realized that there was a higher rate of error, right? So the physicians were incentivized to work beyond their normal capacity. Because if you book an operating room,
I mean, I would rather have the first appointment in the morning,
exactly,
you know?
Right?
I'm just
So,
being honest.
but that's a representation of, right? So you have to think about what people's impetus is for every step of every part that they do. So I think we should start with the idea of, let's just start with the basic ethical principles that we doctor by. And then let's see if some of these scenarios regarding AI can meet those equivalents.
One of the questions that we asked that when we were talking about this.
Who did you ask?
No, Dee-Dee and I were talking about where I was just curious tonight, and I didn't get a chance to do the research, but if you were in an airport and you were given, if you were in an airport and you were given the option of choosing to get onto a plane that was going to take off and land with autopilot, or get on a plane without autopilot, which one would you get on?
Autopilot.
Win. So I
For sure.
would too. I don't know.
I'm just saying.
I mean, I think that if you asked me 50 years ago, I would be way more freaked out about it.
Right.
I think we're habituated to it now. We're habituated to our phones. We're habituated to autopilot. We're habituated to a Tesla driving for us, right? In the end,
accidents.
what?
Yeah,
They
but
do have
it's not-
accidents, but no one's counting how many accidents like a regular car versus a Tesla car. The comparison is it's incomparable. The amount of evaluations that, and it's only getting better. That's the thing. It's only getting,
Sure.
it's only like, people think, right? If you look at, like, if you look at Tesla's shares went up from, it was $36 a share to close to $500 a share. I don't know exactly where it is. People are buying Tesla shares or investing in Tesla, not because it's an electric car. It's because Tesla is probably one of the greatest collectors of information out there in the world. They are learning how people drive. They're learning information about how traffic lights are working. They're learning how well roads are paved. There's so much information that they're gathering. They're gathering all this information. And that is what the value is. People are investing in information, not necessarily in another car. So believe it or not, ChatGPT is this one platform of artificial intelligence Tesla are working on their own platform of artificial intelligence. Waze are also creating, they're integrating their own level of artificial intelligence where they're learning your map, your GPS map is learning your patterns, and they're going to learn your patterns that when you leave your house, you're going to make every green light.
Wow.
They're going to teach you they're going to enable you to get to, right?
Taking it to the next level is that I bet most of you don't know this, but Google is heavily involved in medical care.
Mhm.
Actually, AbbVie partners with Google.
Mhm.
We do research with them, but they're also planning, I don't know if it opened yet, but they were planning, at least a few years ago, they were planning on starting their own medical school. Why? Because they want to attempt to use all of their technology for medical care. So this is coming, whether we like it or not, it's definitely coming. Look, I have a son who's considering medical school.
I was just
He's-
gonna say,
he's
got
pre-med.
going into nursing.
Right, so my son is considering medical school. I mean, I don't know how to guide him because in 30 years from now, the field might be completely different. In 30 years from now, law might be completely different, or dentistry, or anything we do. Mechanics, plumbing, anything could be replaced by a robot, right? And so first, let's just talk about these ethical principles. So the first is autonomy. Patients have the right to make choices, right? So when a physician offers someone a standard care, hey, I would like treatment for my migraines. What could you offer me, right? Those are choices. You could choose, you and your doctor, hopefully make an informed decision, a shared decision about what is best for you, right? So in a way, we have to consider that. If you put your symptoms into a chat box, or if you ask your now computer doctor to make a decision about you, is that true autonomy? You know, then there's also the idea of beneficence. Beneficence is healthcare professionals have the best interest of their patient at heart and will always attempt to choose what is best for the patient. So let's have high blood pressure. And there are different side effects of those blood pressure medications, right? But the best one is, let's say, an ACE inhibitor. I'm just spitting things out, right? So let's say the best one would be lisinopril, okay? Or one of these medications, but that one in you may not be the best choice because that one might make you dizzy and the other one won't. It doesn't take into account your activity level, your previous medications, your family history. I guess it could learn to do those details, but it doesn't have a vested interest in, are you gonna get better, right? So it's just spitting out an algorithm. It feels impersonal, right? Then there's non-maleficence. So one of the things that we live by as doctors is do no harm, right? And so the decisions made by healthcare professionals bear no ill intentions or harm toward their patient. And I hate to say this, but in a way, I don't think doctors really consider a litigious environment when they choose to make decisions. But I would say that somebody who is overworked or whatever, they might actually possibly take better care of their patients if they know that there are repercussions to their actions. So if I choose to do something that isn't medically sound, right, the medical board can come after it. Right? So it's not just do no harm because you're a good person and you don't want to hurt someone, because I think that's still in essence beneficence. This is that the doctor themselves has repercussions if something wrong happens.
There's something I think that all of us are becoming accustomed to, that we learned from the pandemic and the vaccines. The doctors are very circumspect at speaking their intuition, what they feel is probably right, so long as there is not an accreditation mechanism to protect them. So CDC, for example, or some other government institution can make a statement that's flat out wrong, but that'll be a license for the practitioner to do what it says because there is that kind of cover available in terms of the liability.
I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. I think things have changed a lot. And I think that when there's these overarching statements made, they change the way your physician attends to you. I agree completely. And the last one is justice, that there's equal opportunity given to patients in similar situations, thereby establishing equity and fairness. So I thought about this one for a while. Every human being has a bias, right? Regardless, I walk into a room, I see a person, I meet you for the first time. I already have some kind of bias. I make snap judgments. And part of doctoring is attempting to connect with your patient, give them the best care that they could possibly have, right? But then also, I hope that I don't discriminate or give worse care to any class of patients that shows up. I thought in my mind that no. A robot would for sure be equal. A robot has no bias, but that's really not true. So I want you to think about the SATs. So the SATs is supposed to be a standardized test. Well, it turns out that it's completely biased. It's completely biased to wealthy children of a specific gender and race, okay? And it's really pronounced. Okay, so at first I was like, I can't believe that bias would be intrinsically in the care of a robot. But the truth is, it does. They actually found that there is bias from AI.
But the bias is, I don't think it's what we think you're trying to say. The bias is that they're not taking into account, the AI is not taking into account what it needs to because of the ethnic background. The robot, okay, the robot doesn't say, oh, well, that's an African-American and I don't care about African-Americans. That's not what you're talking about.
I'm actually talking about the flip side, that we know that African-American women in particular have different patterns of heart attacks, right? They do not have the typical features that, let's say, a older white male might have, right? So they might have more indigestion, they might have shoulder pain, they might have more vague symptoms. And because that robot doesn't yet kind of visualize the patient in particular, so I'm taking it to the other side, it actually does have bias because it can't take into account that this is a woman, this is a man, this is this race, this is that race. And I think that's important. I actually think that that's part of the nuance of being a doctor. When I walk into a room and I could see that someone's body language is negative towards medical care, right? It makes me address the person in a different way. I might be quieter. I might be more compassionate. I might ask them for their history and background and say, I noticed that you don't seem open to the discussion we're having today. You seem angry. Is there something that I'm not aware of? Right? I can pick up those nuances. Maybe that is bias, but it's like I can get those nuances because of it. And so unfortunately, computers can't take that into account.
When someone wanted to have that, and they're going into a doctor's office, you know, where you're not personal feeling, where you're not going to get that from.
Okay, let's take a scenario that's that you might not have thought of. Okay, so let's take into account in the year 2000 in Kentucky, they had an ICU that they could not properly staff. So what did they do? They hired remote intensivists. That's what it's called. So these were just people sitting in their house in Chicago, and they had all of those monitors up. They never once laid eyes on the patient, ever. They had nurses there. They probably had PAs and nurse practitioners, but they were not certified as intensivists. And these people had no relationship to the patient at all. And all they did was look on the monitors and say, you need to code that person. You need to increase that dose. You need to increase that dose. It was very impersonal. So in essence, we have been moving towards this. Have you seen on TV? You can get birth control now, like just by making a phone call. And most of it is really done by a computer chat box. So how many children do you have? What age do you have? Have you ever had any history of any atypical migraines? Have you ever had blood clots? When do you want your next child? You put those all in, and guess what? There's your birth control. This is what we recommend to you. It feels impersonal. What?
No, nothing.
Okay, but like, it's true. I think we're starting to get used to some of these ideas. But in essence, you still crave that relationship with your internist. Well, how about the next step? Just in the last 10 years, how many of you, if you were ever hospitalized, would see your own doctor? Hospitalists. You're not seeing your doctor anymore. So we're getting habituated to not having care by someone who is your physician. I have a hard time with that.
I don't know. My dad is a doctor, and I grew up going with him, sometimes to people's homes, having that personal connection, seeing, even when I go into a doctor's office now, I don't want to talk to you on North Shore Connect. I don't.
It's true.
I want you to pick up the phone. I want you to have a conversation with me. That's,
It's true.
I don't like it.
But let's also take worst case scenarios. What about the fact that, let's say there is a technological glitch? What about HIPAA? What about data control? What about privacy rules? So I got an email actually yesterday from AbbVie saying, this is rapidly evolving, AI and ChatGPT is rapidly evolving. We want you, who are now responsible for proprietary information by our company, to realize that if you put any of our data into ChatGPT, it will now be public data. But that could be the case for anything that happens to you medically when you're using a robot to treat you.
It's fascinating because I kind of feel like what is ChatGPT collecting, like true information or loud information? Meaning,
What do you mean?
so there's a whole movement, a loud movement of people that believe that the earth is flat,
Right.
right? So if that noise gets loud enough, is that going to be included in their evaluation, in AI's evaluation of decisions? So for example, I mean, like there's a massive anti-vaccine
Right, I was just thinking that.
group out there, and they have many strong opinions. And if that side gets loud enough, is that going to play an active role with regards to the evaluation of the equation? Because really, ChatGPT is, they collected activity over the internet from, I think, 2012 to 2019. Any information that went out there on the internet.
So you're saying it's not
was just
curated,
collecting
that information is not curated or protected, so it has the chance to be adulterated. That's what you're saying. And that's true. We actually know that. So remember how I did all these tests for genetic testing for BRCA, that I was pushing for Ashkenazi Jews to know their status so that families could protect themselves, right? So there's lots of different kinds of genetic tests out there, and some are actually curated by a public database, which means that people can put their information in but it's not properly attended to, so there are mistakes in it. Versus another company that has only a private database that is properly curated. So what Gadi is saying is, if there's background noise that's ridiculous and totally not founded in science, will ChatGPT pick up on that and learn it when it's not curated properly?
In effect, what you're saying is that there is an absence of a kind of certification process to determine when data is credible.
Yes.
That you can't simply use an average, for example. There has to, in years past, there would be a hypothesis, and there would be a great deal of arguing between different segments using different types of statistical analysis and intuition in coming to what seems to be the credible best decision. But things have turned so political that noise is a good way of describing what's going on, because by saying noise, you're saying it doesn't necessarily connect to the reality of the science. It's basically a political voice with a separate agenda that may not have anything to do with it. I'm also thinking that you haven't mentioned this, but I'm sure you will now. The whole idea that medicine is becoming more and more specialization, separate specializations, but the human is an integrated system. And so what we've lost is practitioners who have a generalized view, who can think in terms of a whole system rather than a specific symptom.
It's true. It's so true. It really, that is something that really bothers me. That's why a lot of people will sometimes say, okay, I'll go to this specialist, this specialist, this specialist, but then they also will go to a geriatrician who can look at the bigger picture, right? I definitely see what you're saying.
I mean, that situation is going on with regard to vaccines. Gadi mentioned this, and I find myself on the kind of renegade side of the thing, because as there is more freedom in expressing doubts, there is a sense that there is the kind of whole integrated perspective that's being lost. There is research in a narrow range, and these pervasive, incredible decisions, inferences are made that disregard the fact that there are other factors, and specifically with regard to vaccines, that the human body is extraordinary, and that there is a question as to whether or not it is actually worth the risk for many vaccines that are developed. Because if you look at the kind of trending wide perspective on what happens, more often than not, the human body in itself, by itself, will come to a better decision than using logic that may not be really appropriate to the circumstances.
I don't think I want to get into the details of vaccines versus not vaccines, but I think I'll take it to the level of holistic, that, you know, I might complain of ear pain, but if you don't understand that my ear pain's accompanied by dizziness or get those questions, that might be my main complaint, right? But I also might have a mood disorder or multiple medications or other things going on that would change the way I treat you in a more holistic way than just an algorithm for ear pain. Right? So I agree with you. I think it's way more complex than we think. I think the body does have a healing capacity, but you have to think about how is the GI system related to the neurology system, related to the hematological system. So you're right. Like, but what if I told you that an AI could eventually learn to have complex thinking skills?
Yes, yes.
And so I think right now we think of it as linear, that a computer takes this problem, strep throat, and treats it with this antibiotic. If you're allergic, it treats you with this antibiotic. But I do think that eventually doctors, will notice that complex decision-making will be easier from an AI perspective than it is from a human. I just want to put that out there, because I think that that might happen.
AI represents the body of total data and information and experience. And to the extent you can come up with algorithms that use these integrated concepts, it's going to be more efficient than what any one doctor could possibly develop in a lifetime.
But I think there's pluses and minuses, right? Because if you go to an oncologist, there can be two paths, right?
Right,
And they, because it's a litigious society, they will not tell you anymore which path that you should take. They say, well, you should decide which path you should take. I'm not a doctor. I don't know what's the best path to take. They don't want to tell you because if it's a bad outcome, then they might get sued. And I've had that happen. It's
exactly.
it's not good.
Right, so I think either scenario is not great, but let's do another scenario. I am bothered by one more thing about the legal consequences. So, okay, so we just talked about a doctor do no harm, make sure there's no repercussions to your actions. Well, the AI doesn't have any repercussions, so if it makes a mistake, there's no repercussions to it, right? But the other problem is that legal capabilities today in the United States lag behind the technology. So think about the show 13 Reasons Why, right? Like when we started to have Facebook and Instagram and all these other things happen, we didn't yet have controls for our kids. We didn't yet have rules in place for predators or for, invasion of privacy type rules. That came after things went bad. And so one of the issues I have regarding AI in medicine is that how do we establish a framework that has moral, legal ramifications that we have checks and balances on before it gets away from us? Like Space Odyssey, right? What was it, Hal? So Hal's there making all these decisions, right? Without a human being making those decisions. Hal's making the decisions. And there were no checks and balances. War games. What about war games? Right? Remember war games? So what happened was the computer was just playing a game. It didn't feel any of the repercussions of its actions. So I worry about that. I worry about the fact that it could get away from us quicker than.
Consequences to whoever. And you can't go after the actual robot.
So what if it's 50 years later?
Pretty much society. I don't know. There's gonna be someone that's helps.
I would like to think so, but I don't know for sure. Because some of this is also institutionalized, right? So if Northwestern decides to adopt AI in their emergency department, and that's it, they don't have any human doctors anymore. All they have is, this is the institution. This is our decision. And the government backs it. And then another institution does the same thing. And that starts, So I just don't know if you could easily pinpoint who's at fault.
And the whole question of fault is a problematic issue because there are overlaying concepts that inform wisdom and what's right and proper. And there's no single answer to a decision that's going to be made. And it becomes a process of how far do you take a particular concept so you have a kind of weighted average that can be, you can select, you can justify doing completely disparate, at any rate. And that's.
But then again, what if it nudges society in a matter that changes our morality?
If it works to be cost efficient, for example, separate and apart from any kind of moral context, then the mechanism is something that practitioners can hide behind. They had nothing to do with it. It was the
It was the AI, right?
But if you have 100, if you have 100 physicians who are asked a certain question about a certain patient, you could come up with 50, 60 different opinions. But if you own 100 robots, you're the company that is instilling the information, you could have 100 robots with the same opinion.
Right.
But
So in a way, it's more consistent, but is it always correct?
right.
Right, because people are more complex. But how about the benefit of AI? One of the benefits I
What's
see of it,
important, sorry, just on that specific point is like, it is constantly reevaluating and relearning the data,
it is.
right? We're kind of going from a perspective of like, there's one little computer programmer, which I think is what's sitting in the back of our head. When you go to a doctor, you've got a human being, plus the human being has got a phenomenal amount of information that they learned. When you go to an AI, you don't have that human being, you just have a collection of information. But what we need to remember is that it's not just one perspective of information, it's constantly collecting and reevaluating, collecting and reevaluating, which over time, no human being is going to be able to come close to hold and evaluate the amount of data that these AIs are able to do, right? Do you remember what was his name? Kasparov, the chess
Yeah,
game,
yeah.
right? When he had like the first computer game against IBM, and then
Right,
the second.
right.
And then like by the third computer that they generated, which was decades ago, he had no chance against the computer, because it was just, the computer is just collecting so much data against what this person is able to do. So undoubtedly, at some point in time, AI is going to have so much more accurate information from a scientific perspective. Then it's not just a computer programmer sitting at the back of it. It's really collective information that is being ingested or invested into a decision that the AI made.
What did the rabbi say?
Well, today we give Dee-Dee a chance to speak. One of the things that we wanted to that when we were talking a little bit about this was
Rama.
yeah, just before that, in Japan, they had one of the most advanced robots, and they were integrating these robots into elderly care. So a person was moved into an assisted living, an elderly was moved into an assisted living, and they were given a robot to have conversations with. And they were able to have conversations with the robot, and they were highly intelligent robots. What they found was that after a very short period of time, no one was interested in having conversations with robots. Because there's a human concept.
It's like those fake dogs that they give.
Yeah, or even looking at somebody in the eye has some, when you exchange.
Emotional connection.
Yes.
Well, even when you
Like-
have your masks on.
That is
You
not,
look
that is
at
coming.
the-
It is coming.
It is coming.
It is totally coming.
But what we were talking about when we were building this discussion was Rambam. So Rambam was the quintessential rabbi, community person, who also was a physician, right? And when you think of a doctor, my feeling of doctoring is being a community-based person, right? I am looking at my own beliefs, my own science, my own learning, and I'm partnering with you as my patient and your own beliefs and your own health and what you come with, and we are creating health together. So look, Judaism says that we as Jews need to embrace medical technology that helps us, right? So a woman should and can have an epidural if she is in pain in labor, right? I'm not saying that's your choice, but what I'm saying is that technology exists, and in Judaism, we're okay with that, right? Or how about in vitro fertilization? We've talked about this before. What about pre-implantation genetics, where we manipulate that fetus to have certain characteristics, right? Sometimes these things are needed because they help promote the health of multiple generations of people, right? So these are just things that we have to think about, like as we move forward, should we, if you could get better care from a robot, should we take it? If you knew that the robot did a better job with the hysterectomy than me, would you say you must see the robot and not the human? It's gonna get to that point.
Isn't it subjective though? Because medicine is kind of a little art and science, right?
It is. It is.
So the robot can do the science part.
Well, I was thinking of a different thing. Going back to that idea about the ICU that I talked about, like how we're habituated to not necessarily seeing people taking care of you. Well, I feel that there are lots of people who are underserved, right? Insurance is expensive. They might not go seek care until things are urgent or emergent, and then they go to the emergency department and then they get emergency services, but it could have been prevented if they had taken care of it earlier on. Well, maybe robots allow more people in more societies to have better access to care where physicians wouldn't necessarily be. I just think that we should take all the points.
Right.
Like a doctor desert, like a food desert.
Right, exactly. Like on an Indian reservation where there's one physician and no cardiologists.
But it sounds like in the next 25 years, our grandchildren won't have a choice. Their choice, it's AI, it's not going to be the doctors. They have to be able to have that personal interaction. Unless,
I don't know if we
Except for
could
the
stop it.
psychiatrists.
I don't know if we could stop it. I think it's interesting for us to talk about. And they interviewed some of the inventors of ChatGPT who also had concerns over the ethics and what was going to happen in the future regarding this technology, because it is going to get away from us.
And you've got big institutions. And if you remove liability for the people who actually discover the mechanisms, then it can end up anywhere. I'm thinking too, a simpler, more narrow kind of situation is there's rarely a fully unique, successful decision to be made. There are always assessments of trade-offs. And if I'm going to go through a process that's really risky, I'd like to know that it's being looked at by somebody who has historical wisdom and knowledge and can see things for more than just the percent probability of an adverse situation.
I agree.
Somebody who puts it all together, who says, look, at your age, I can't help but feel, in looking at the situation, that if you did that, there's too much risk there. The payoff isn't enough. And even though he couldn't give you the equation, how he calculated it, I think I would feel more comfortable in having that perspective guide my decision. Now, the ideal thing would be if AI was the state of the art in terms of accumulating data with obvious levers that you could pull to make things more important or less important, individual elements, then you could have both. You could have the wisdom that's interpreting the facility of the AI to present data in a particular way.
I like that. I like the blended model the best,
Yeah.
right? A physician can see you then put it into the AI, and then see if the two decisions are compatible. And the physician can then choose what's best for the patient along with the assistance of AI. I like that the best, actually.
And actually, I'm also thinking, Dee-Dee, if you're the one in charge, people will often say things as what they believe, and it's not. And to a practitioner who's informed and is experienced, they can recognize motives that go beyond simply a yes or a no.
It's
Right.
complex.
That was one of the things that we were talking about, is like when you walk into a doctor, you may present a specific ailment. When the doctor looks at you, they pick up, through experience, they pick up other things. They notice, I don't know, eyes are dilated, or
How
red
you
eyes,
walk.
whatever it is, or how they feel like you breathing. Whatever those small things they naturally pick up, just because of their human connection with you, or the way they feel. I mean, just think about whenever you're speaking, you know, where when you had your kid, when your kids were younger, your kids would walk into the kitchen in the morning and you'd look at them and you say, "You're not well. We're going to the doctor." You didn't need to take the temperature. You didn't need, you know, you just knew they're not themselves. The real question is, like, is that a human connection, or is that a collective information of data? You know, is that a collected amount of data that we're collecting together, and that is ultimately is putting it together? So, do you want some water?
No, I'm good. But I will tell you, I read something really interesting, right? So what are our solutions to this problem? So one of the articles I read said that healthcare professionals and AI developers must work hand in hand with ethicists and philosophers to develop programs that are moral, that preserve human rights and dignity without bias, before they get away from us. And they suggested that, you know how physicians take the Hippocratic Oath, that we will do no harm, that we will do what's best for our patients. They suggested that the code should be the Robocratic Oath. So where, just like we said, there might be a blended model. There might be physicians using AI to their benefit, but then taking it back to who's responsible, who's accountable. That's the model that might change. It might be shared responsibility, shared decision-making. So that might be how it ends up
You know what?
being.
Problem is, if the AI company can make more money doing it their way as opposed to doing it in half and half, doctors don't stand a chance.
Well,
That's
that's
gonna
been
be
a
their,
government command.
it's gonna be their motivation. It's money.
Got it.
It's happening right now.
Yeah. It's really, I find this, I think the dystopian idea is just one step away from us. It really is.
Well, already you don't have a personal relationship, you stay with a doctor, you can face to face to see a doctor. So we're already being pushed that way,
Right.
away from the old way.
You're
4
right.
months sleep then.
Right.
Would you say there's a shortage of doctors out there?
It's gonna be.
I think there is
Why
already.
is it that you can't get an appointment?
Because there isn't as much staff.
But you also have to see a certain number of patients per hour to get paid.
Right. I think it's multifactorial. I think it depends on where you live. I think it depends on the subspecialty. So if you ask anyone, we're in a modern city here in Chicago, right? You would expect that if you wanted to see a rheumatologist, okay, so I have a friend of mine who's a nurse and her son is a physical therapist. They're in science, they're in medicine. It took 6 months for them to see a rheumatologist. That's crazy to me.
It's really crazy.
right?
Especially if
That's
you're not
crazy.
feeling well and you're sick. You really wanna see somebody. So what's
Exactly.
the alternative?
But also there are other problems. The other problems are, how do we teach physicians now, right? And how do we pay physicians? So like, you know, I would say that most med students coming out think that they should specialize because it gives you better quality of life sometimes, and it's better, reimbursement if you're at a specific level. So I don't know. Right now, I think our system is somewhat broken.
You've got third-party payers that get between the patient and the doctor, and that creates lots of conflict.
It does. It does. I mean, look, we live in a capitalist society still. And I definitely think there is problem with the Canadian healthcare system where you would have to wait 2 years to get a hip replacement, right? But then again, there's equity, right? So there's more equity. There's the idea of economy, that we think about the cost. If you're this is not how Americans think. If any of you read A Man Called Uva.
Yes.
So that book was really interesting, right? I felt like there's this idea in Europe that if you're of a certain age, you no longer have access to all of healthcare. The United States, we would never do that. It would be appalling and horrifying to us to say that someone who's of a certain age, just because of their age, not because of who they are and their activity level. So if you are 90 years old and running marathons and working full time,
You've had your
But-
bite at the apple, that's it.
they just say done, right?
If the US duplicated the Canadian system for providing medicine, the Canadians would not have any place to go to get their care.
Okay. I like it. Yeah, so I was disturbed all week when I had to prepare. I'm still disturbed.
I'm gonna be disturbed all week, like thinking about this.
If you look back at everything, how it's a constant growth and, progress for progress sake, from the telephone and I have a sign that I saw that my niece took a picture of. It's free television, switchboard, in a motel. And it's gonna happen. You can't stop this the way the world has been. You just can't stop this stuff.
It's true.
So you have to deal with it somehow.
Yeah,
I think that's why doctors who are in boutique practices are becoming more
I do too.
well-known and
Because they-
preferable and
If they only take on a certain amount of patients, so they can specialize and really.
well,
get
they
to
have
know.
more, they seem to have more control. And if I
Because
want,
they secure their salary before the year even starts.
Right.
So they're not incentivized to see you or not see you.
no, I can get he will email me,
My
he
parents
will
are
see
too.
me, he will,
But you realize that's not equitable, right? So there are so
Correct.
many people who don't have the $1,500 or $2,000 a year to pay that aren't gonna get the same access as you. And so I agree with that. I agree. If you yourself want the best healthcare, the VIP method is probably gonna be the best for you. But do I like that that's how it's gotten? No, not at all. I believe most of healthcare has to do with advocacy also. And unfortunately, the VIP system allows you to have an advocate, but the hospitalist system certainly does not.
And Magic Johnson is a perfect example.
What do you mean?
Like he had access when he found out he had AIDS.
Oh, yeah,
He had access to medicine that 1% of the population
it's true.
had access to. Almost anybody else would have died. And
Exactly.
Who's this you're talking?
Magic. I do think about that, actually. Just because he was wealthy and in the public eye, he had access to
he got
care.
great health
and
care.
he's
He didn't have
alive.
to worry about it.
Yeah, yeah. All right, well, thank you. There wasn't a lot of halachic stuff to talk about this week. So, I mean, from my purposes, I said, Gadi, I think that most of this is just like batting around some of these ideas.
Hold the,
Great class,
hold the booze till it's over.
great class.
All right, I'm gonna go home and take the
Beautiful job,
Robocratic
beautiful
oath.
Dee-Dee, there's this woman who has this problem. that
Good night,
Goes to
everyone.
a doctor, this is with regard to specialization. And she says, doctor, I'm really concerned because